Drew Shelton sat alone at a table for two in the kind of Nashville restaurant where the wine list had no prices. His collar was buttoned wrong. Across from him, an empty chair, a clean glass, a place setting no one had touched. 40 minutes past the reservation. His blind date was not coming. A woman in a blue sequin dress at a nearby table had been watching him. She set her napkin down. She stood. She crossed the dining room without hurrying, stopped at his table, and waited until he looked up. "Would you like to go out with me?" Drew stared at her. The empty chair. The full restaurant. A stranger offering what his entire night had already taken away. His hand flattened on the tablecloth, and something shifted behind his expression, the first thing in 4 years that did not feel like an obligation. This is not the story you think it is. What she did next changed both their lives. Stay. You will see why she really walked over. Drew Shelton was 37 years old and had been a Finnish carpenter in Nashville for a little over 3 years. He worked for Pete Donnelly's crew, small outfit, 6 guys, mostly residential renovations, and the occasional commercial job when the bids came in right. He was good at the work. Better than good. Pete had said once, after watching Drew reframe a load-bearing header in under 40 minutes without checking the plans, that the man built things the way a surgeon operated. Quiet hands, no wasted motion, every cut exactly where it needed to be. Pete did not know the half of it. Before Nashville, before the carpentry, Drew had been a lead structural engineer at Alderman and Keyes in Atlanta. It was the kind of firm that stamped drawings for hospitals and convention centers and the occasional high-rise that changed a skyline. Drew had spent 9 years there. He had been good at that, too. Then Laura died. It was a car accident on I-85 years ago in November. A truck had crossed the median. Drew got the call at his desk. He drove to the hospital. He drove home alone. 6 weeks later, Alderman and Keyes was acquired by a national engineering conglomerate. The new owners restructured immediately. Drew's entire division was eliminated in a single memo. He was offered a demotion to junior project reviewer in a department he had never worked in. He signed the severance papers, packed a single box from his desk, and drove home. A month after that, he put the Atlanta house on the market and moved to Nashville with his son. Sam was 10, quiet for his age, but not shy. More like a kid who had figured out that watching was usually more useful than talking. He had his mother's light brown hair and his father's habit of tilting his head when he was thinking about something structural. Every Sunday morning, the two of them sat at the kitchen table and built model bridges out of balsa wood and white glue. Sam would hand Drew the pieces. Drew would explain why the truss needed a diagonal brace, or why the arch distributed weight better than a flat span. They never talked about Laura during these mornings. They did not need to. The bridges were the conversation. It was Pete who had pushed Drew into the blind date. They had been tearing out old cabinets in a Germantown bungalow when Pete brought it up. 4 years is long enough, Pete said, not looking at Drew. My wife's cousin. She's nice. Normal. Has a job. Drew had said nothing for a full 30 seconds, which Pete took as a yes. The date had not shown up. Drew's current project was the Whitfield Building, a 4-story brick structure built in 1923, sitting on the corner of Woodland and 14th in East Nashville. The building had been a department store, then a warehouse, then nothing for 11 years. Now a local preservation trust was trying to restore it. The trust had the permits and the plans, but not the money. Drew was there for the finished carpentry, crown molding, window casings, the original oak staircase that needed to be rebuilt from the 3rd floor up. But Pete had noticed something. Every time the engineers came through with their clipboards and laser levels, Drew would find the thing they missed. A cracked lintel above a doorway. A joist that had been sistered with the wrong gauge lumber. He never said anything to the engineers directly. He would mention it to Pete, and Pete would mention it to the trust director, and the engineers would come back and find exactly what Drew had described. Todd Harmon owned half the commercial corridor surrounding the Whitfield. He ran Harmon Development Group, the biggest local outfit in East Nashville, with enough city council relationships to get permits approved before the ink was dry on the applications. For 3 years, Todd had been trying to buy the Whitfield from the Preservation Trust. His plan was simple: demolish the building, put up a 7-story mixed-use tower, and add another line to his portfolio. The trust had refused every offer. The Whitfield was on the historic register, and the trust board believed the building was worth saving. Todd Harmon did not share that belief. The following Monday morning, Drew was on the 2nd floor of the Whitfield, pulling measurements for the window casings, when the front door opened and 3 people walked in. The trust director, a man in a suit carrying a clipboard, and Kate Lawson, wearing a hard hat that did not quite fit and a pair of boots that had never touched a job site before. She was there as the potential investor. Lawson Capital Partners, based out of Charlotte, the trust had been courting her firm for months to fund the full restoration. $38 million. The kind of money that turned a derelict building into a landmark. Drew did not recognize her immediately. He was in work gear, sawdust on his forearms, a pencil behind his ear. Kate did not recognize him either. Not until they rounded the corner on the second-floor landing, and she looked up, and he looked down, and both of them stopped walking at the same time. Neither said anything. The trust director kept talking about the original millwork. Kate adjusted her hard hat. Drew went back to his tape measure. The restaurant might as well have happened on a different planet. The walkthrough continued. The trust director led them through each floor, pointing out the restoration plans, the structural assessments, the projected timeline. On the second floor, they reached the southeast corner where 3 load-bearing columns met the original brick wall. Drew was already there, kneeling beside the base of the center column with a flashlight. The trust director paused. "Drew, these folks are looking at the structural scope." Drew stood. He pointed at the column base, then up at the header where the column met the beam. "This was modified," he said, "sometime in the last 15 years. The original column was 8 by 8 solid timber. Someone replaced it with a 4 by 6 built-up post and added a steel plate at the top that is undersized for the load. The beam is deflecting a 1/4 inch. It is not critical yet, but under full occupancy load, that deflection will double." He turned to the man with the clipboard. "Your assessment did not flag it." The man with the clipboard opened his mouth. Kate tilted her head. The trust director looked uncomfortable. Drew kept going. He walked them through the fix, a new 8 by 8 post, a properly sized bearing plate, sister joists on either side of the beam to redistribute the load. He cited the relevant building code sections from memory. He described the sequencing so the fix could be done without shoring the entire floor. He was not showing off. He was describing what he saw the way a mechanic described what was wrong with an engine, plainly, specifically, without decoration. Kate said nothing during the entire explanation, but she stayed behind after the trust director moved the group to the 3rd floor. She stood at the column Drew had flagged and looked at the steel plate, then at the beam, then at the pencil marks Drew had left on the wood. Later, after the walkthrough ended and the trust director walked the suited man to his car, Kate found Drew alone on the 2nd floor. He was back on his knees, running his hand along the base of the column. "You are not just a carpenter," she said. Drew did not look up. "I am the one they hired." Kate waited. Drew did not elaborate. She let it go. What Drew did not know, what he would not know for weeks, was that Kate had already hired her own independent structural engineer to assess the Whitfield before committing to the investment. That engineer submitted his report 2 days after the walkthrough. In the summary, he wrote, "The second-floor column modification at grid line C4 represents a significant structural deficiency that was not identified in the existing assessment. Whoever caught this saved you from a $38 million mistake." Kate read that line 3 times. Then she set the report on her desk and looked out the window of her hotel room at the Nashville skyline and thought about a carpenter who cited building code from memory and did not want to talk about it. Drew Shelton had just become the most important person in a $38 million decision, and he had no idea. But this was only the beginning, because the woman who walked across that restaurant was not just being kind, and the building Drew was restoring was hiding something far worse than a bad column. Todd Harmon found out about Kate Lawson's visit to the Whitfield on a Tuesday afternoon. His assistant had seen her name on the trust calendar. Todd made 2 phone calls. The first was to a member of the Metro Nashville Codes Department. The second was to a city council member who owed him a favor from a rezoning vote 3 years earlier. By Thursday, the Whitfield had its first inspection notice stapled to the front door. For code violations cited, 2 electrical, 1 fire egress, 1 structural. Drew read the notice standing on the front steps, his coffee still in his hand. He recognized 2 of the violations as conditions that had already been corrected. The third did not apply to a building under active renovation. The fourth described a structural deficiency in a section of the building that did not exist. Pete called Drew that afternoon. "Todd Harmon has been calling subcontractors," Pete said. telling them to stay away from the Whitfield. Says the project is going to get shut down. He paused. The plumber pulled out this morning. Said he could not afford to cross Harmon. Drew said nothing. He folded the inspection notice and put it in his back pocket. That evening, he sat at his kitchen table after Sam was asleep and spread the notice flat under the lamp. He read every line. He pulled up the building code on his laptop and cross-referenced each citation. By midnight, he had written a point-by-point rebuttal in a notebook. Engineer's handwriting, small and precise, every code section numbered. He photographed each page with his phone and saved the images in a folder he labeled with the Whitfield's permit number. The next morning, Kate arrived at the Whitfield with a rolled-up set of cost projections under her arm. Drew was on a ladder in the first-floor corridor, fitting a piece of crown molding into a corner joint. She set the projections on a sawhorse and watched him work for a moment before he noticed her. "Coffee," she said, holding up a second cup. He climbed down, took the cup. Black, no sugar, no cream. He did not ask how she knew. She did not explain. They talked for 15 minutes. About the molding profile, the original plaster medallions on the third floor, the staircase oak that had been sourced from a salvage yard in Chattanooga. Nothing personal. Nothing about the restaurant. But when Kate left, Drew noticed she had written something on the cost projection roll, a small checkmark next to the line item for the second-floor structural repair, the one he had identified. The city inspector arrived on a Friday. He was a man in his 50s with a clipboard and the particular expression of someone who had been told to find problems. Drew met him at the front door. They walked every cited violation together. Drew did not raise his voice. He did not argue. He simply walked the inspector to each location and explained, in the kind of detail that made the inspector stop writing and start listening, exactly why each citation was either already resolved, inapplicable, or physically impossible. At the electrical panel, Drew pointed out the new wiring that had been permitted and inspected 3 months earlier. At the fire egress, he showed the temporary construction signage that met code for an active renovation site. At the non-existent structural deficiency, he pulled out his own copy of the building plans and showed the inspector that the cited grid line did not correspond to any column or wall in the actual structure. The inspector looked at his clipboard, then at Drew. "You are a carpenter?" he said. "Today I am," Drew said. Kate had been standing near the staircase the entire time. She had not said a word. She watched Drew handle the inspector the way she watched people in boardrooms, measuring what kind of person she was dealing with. That same week, Todd Harmon went directly to the Preservation Trust Board. He sent a formal offer, $4.2 million above market value for the Whitfield building. The letter included a single line that was not quite a threat: "Before the investor walks." The trust director called Kate that evening. He was nervous. The board was split. 4 members wanted to hold firm. 2 were wavering. 1 had not responded. The director asked Kate if she was still committed. Kate asked one question: "Has your carpenter seen the foundation report?" The director paused. "Why would I show a carpenter the foundation report?" Kate did not answer the question. That Friday, Kate and Drew had dinner. Not at the upscale restaurant. At a place on Gallatin Road with vinyl booths and laminated menus and a television above the bar showing a Predators game. Kate had suggested it. Drew had not argued. It was their first conversation that was not about the Whitfield. Drew mentioned Sam. Not much, just that his son was 10 and liked building things. Kate mentioned that she had not been back to Charlotte in 3 weeks. Drew asked if that was normal. Kate said she was not sure what normal looked like anymore. They split the check. Drew held the door on the way out. Kate's hand brushed against his arm as she passed, and neither of them acknowledged it. The sound of a diesel engine at 6 in the morning brought Drew to the window of his truck, parked on Woodland Street. Across the lot from the Whitfield, on a parcel Todd Harmon owned outright, a demolition crew was setting up. Excavator, dumpsters, a chain-link fence going up around the perimeter. Drew knew the problem before he finished his coffee. The 2 buildings shared a wall. The Whitfield's east wall and the adjacent building's west wall were not just neighboring, they were bonded. Same brick, same mortar joints, same foundation footer. A load-bearing party wall built in 1923 when the 2 structures went up at the same time. If Todd's crew demolished the adjacent building without proper shoring, the shared wall would destabilize. The Whitfield's east face would lose its lateral support. Best case, the wall would crack. Worst case, the second and third floors would pancake. Drew drove to the adjacent site. Todd was standing near the excavator, talking to a foreman. Drew walked up and waited until Todd turned around. "That is a party wall," Drew said. "Bonded masonry. If you take down your building without bracing the shared face, you collapse both structures." Todd looked at Drew the way a man looks at a parking meter that has expired. "Both buildings," Todd said. "That is an interesting thought." Drew held his gaze. "You knock this wall, you take down both buildings." Todd smiled. "Then maybe both buildings should come down." Drew did not respond. He turned, walked to his truck, and drove directly to the Metro Nashville Department of Codes and Building Safety. He filed a structural hazard report with the adjacent building's address, citing the party wall condition and the demolition activity. He attached photos and a hand-drawn diagram showing the shared masonry and the load path. The department acknowledged the report. They said they would schedule a review. Drew asked when. The clerk said she could not give a specific date. Todd's council connections were doing their work. Kate moved faster. Within 48 hours, she had hired an independent structural engineering firm out of Knoxville, one with no Nashville ties and no relationship to Todd Harmon, to assess the party wall. Their report, delivered 4 days later, confirmed Drew's assessment in precise technical language. The shared wall was structurally integral to both buildings. Demolition of the adjacent structure without a full shoring and bracing plan would create an imminent collapse risk for the Whitfield. Kate sent the report to the Codes Department, the City Council, and the Trust Board simultaneously. While the engineers were working the party wall, Kate started pulling records. She had her Charlotte office run a full history on Harmon Development Group's involvement with the Whitfield building. What came back was incomplete but revealing. Harmon Development had performed a major interior renovation on the Whitfield 12 years earlier, a gut rehab of the second and third floors. The project had been permitted and inspected, but several key sign-off documents were missing from the city's files. The structural inspection at completion, the one that should have verified all load-bearing modifications met code, was not in the system. Kate printed the gap in the records and set it on her hotel desk next to the Knoxville engineer's report. She did not say anything to Drew yet, but the next time she saw him at the Whitfield, he was on his knees again, fitting a baseboard along the first-floor corridor. She stopped walking and watched him for a long moment before continuing to the trust director's office. Something had changed. She trusted his judgment now, not as a consultant or an expert, but the way you trusted a person whose instincts had been tested and had not failed. And Drew, for his part, had started to notice that Kate Lawson was not just writing checks. She was reading structural reports. She was cross-referencing permit histories. She was asking the questions that the people being paid to ask them had stopped asking years ago. They were becoming something neither of them had named, and neither of them was in a hurry to. But the building was not done with its secrets, and the worst one was behind a wall on the third floor. Drew found the envelope on a Wednesday afternoon. He had been pulling old wall paneling in the third-floor utility corridor, original lath and plaster behind 1970s wood veneer. The veneer came off in sheets. Behind one section of lath, in the narrow utility chase where the original gas lines had once run, a manila envelope was wedged between two vertical studs, sealed with packing tape that had yellowed and gone brittle. He opened it on the third-floor landing, kneeling under the window where the afternoon light was best. Inside were 4 sheets of engineering drawings, blue line on white bond, folded into quarters. In the lower right corner of each sheet, the Harmon Development Group seal, a project number, and a date. October 2013. Drew unfolded the first sheet and felt his breathing change. The drawings showed the second-floor structural modifications, the same area he had flagged during Kate's walkthrough. Column grid C4. But these were not the as-built drawings that should have been filed with the city. These were the instruction set. They showed that the original 8x8 timber columns at 3 locations were to be removed and replaced with 4x6 built-up posts. The bearing plates were specified at half the size required for the load. A handwritten note in the margin read, "Use existing hardware. Do not order new plates. Keep cost under budget line." Drew sat on the landing floor. He had been an engineer long enough to recognize a cost-cutting directive that bypassed structural requirements. Someone at Harmon Development had ordered undersized supports to save money and hidden the evidence behind the wall when the renovation was finished. He pulled out his phone and searched the Metro Nashville building records. In February 2014, 4 months after the Harmon renovation, a partial collapse on the second floor of the Whitfield killed 2 construction workers. The investigation was inconclusive. The cause was listed as undetermined structural failure. No charges were filed. The cause was not undetermined. It was right here, folded into quarters and hidden in a wall for 12 years. He found Kate at her hotel that evening. He did not call ahead. He walked into the lobby carrying the envelope and asked the front desk to ring her room. She came down in 10 minutes. She was still in her work clothes. She looked at the envelope, then at his face, and sat down across from him in the lobby without asking what it was about. Drew laid the drawings on the table between them. He explained what they showed, what they meant, and what had happened 4 months after the modifications were made. Kate listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "This is why he wants it demolished." Drew nodded. He is not buying a building. He is buying a burial. They sat in the hotel lobby for another hour. And for the first time, they told each other the truth. Not because they had been hiding it, but because until this moment, there had been no reason to say it. Kate explained her role. Not just an investor evaluating a project, but the CEO of Lawson Capital Partners. The final decision maker on a $38 million commitment. The person whose signature would determine whether the Whitfield lived or died. Drew told her about Atlanta, about Alderman and Keys, about 9 years of structural engineering, the hospitals and the high-rises and the skyline projects, about the acquisition, the restructuring, the memo that eliminated his division, about the severance papers he signed without arguing, about Nashville and carpentry and the decision to build smaller things for a while. Neither of them had been hiding. The concealment was simply the shape of 2 lives that had no reason to intersect at that level, until a 12-year-old envelope made it necessary. Kate looked at the drawings one more time. "What do you want to do with these?" Drew said, "The right thing." Kate's legal team reviewed the drawings the next day. A construction litigation attorney from Charlotte flew to Nashville Thursday morning, examined the originals, and delivered her assessment by that afternoon. The drawings constituted physical evidence of a structural modification that violated both the approved building plans and the Tennessee Building Code. Combined with the 2014 collapse report, they established a direct causal link between Harmon Development's cost-cutting directives and the deaths of 2 construction workers. Todd Harmon found out that Drew had the drawings before the week was over. On Friday morning, a courier delivered a cease and desist letter to Pete Donnelly's office, addressed to Drew. The letter, signed by Todd's attorney, claimed that the engineering drawings were proprietary intellectual property of Harmon Development Group and demanded their immediate return along with any copies. Kate's attorneys responded the same day. The drawings had been found inside a building that Harmon Development no longer owned, embedded in the building's own wall structure. They were the property of the current building owner, the Preservation Trust. Harmon Development had no legal claim. Todd tried a different angle. The following Monday, Pete Donnelly received a phone call. Not from Todd directly, from Todd's director of operations. The message was simple. Any contracting firm that continued work on the Whitfield building would be blacklisted from every Harmon Development project in the Nashville metro area. For a small outfit like Pete's, that was not a threat. It was an extinction event. Pete called Drew that night. His voice was tight. "I have got 6 guys who depend on me," he said. "I cannot lose Harmon's work. That is 1/3 of my revenue." Drew was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Cut me loose if you need to. I will finish the Whitfield on my own if I have to." Pete did not respond right away. Drew could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. Finally, Pete said, "I did not say I was cutting you loose. I said I am scared." "I know," Drew said. "So am I." Kate filed the formal complaint with the Tennessee Board of Licensing for Contractors the following Tuesday. She submitted the original drawings, the independent structural assessment of the second-floor modifications, the 2014 Tosha collapse report, and a timeline showing that Harmon Development had completed the renovation, concealed the directive drawings, and made no disclosure to investigators after the collapse. The filing was public record. By Wednesday, 2 of Todd Harmon's city council allies had quietly declined invitations to a fundraiser he was hosting the following month. That evening, Drew was at the Whitfield alone. The building was dark except for the work lamps he had strung along the first-floor corridor. He was fitting the last piece of the original staircase's bottom newel post. a turned oak piece he had shaped on a lathe to match the 1923 original, when he heard footsteps on the plywood subfloor. Kate came around the corner carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one without saying anything and sat on the bottom stair while he worked. After a while, she said, "Why did you never go back to engineering?" Drew turned the newel post in his hands, checking the grain. "I did go back," he said. "I just used different tools." Kate looked at the staircase. The joints were tight. The wood was warm under the work lights. She drank her coffee and did not ask anything else. The Tennessee Board of Licensing for Contractors opened a formal investigation into Harmon Development Group in the 3rd week of October. 2 investigators were assigned. They requested all project files from the Whitfield renovation, as well as files from 3 other Harmon projects completed between 2011 and 2015. Todd moved quickly. Within days of the investigation's announcement, he initiated the sale of the adjacent property, the one where the demolition crew had been staging, to a limited liability company registered in Delaware. The sale was structured to close in 72 hours, which was fast enough to suggest that Todd wanted to distance himself from the property before the investigation expanded. Kate's team in Charlotte traced the Delaware LLC to a registered agent in Wilmington, then to a management company in Nashville, then back to Todd Harmon through a chain of 3 holding entities. It took 48 hours. Kate showed Drew the corporate chain diagram on her laptop at the Whitfield. He looked at it without expression. 3 shells, he said, for 1 empty lot. The lot is not the point, Kate said. He is trying to sell himself out of the blast radius. The public records requests that followed revealed a pattern. 3 other Harmon development renovation projects, a warehouse in Donaldson, a retail building in Madison, and a mixed-use conversion in Inglewood, all showed the same indicators. Undersized structural members in the as-built conditions that did not match the approved engineering plans. Missing inspection sign-offs. Budget memos referencing cost reductions in structural line items. The families of the 2 workers killed in the 2014 Whitfield collapse were contacted by the board's investigators in early November. The case, which had been closed for over a decade, was reopened. The Preservation Trust Board convened a special meeting on a Saturday. Todd Harmon's standing offer to purchase the Whitfield, now at $4.2 million above market value, was the only agenda item. The trust director presented the offer, Kate's investment commitment, and the evidence that had emerged from the board investigation. The vote was 5-2. The trust would reject Todd's offer and proceed with Kate Lawson's restoration investment. Todd Harmon's contractor license was suspended the same week, pending the outcome of the board investigation. That afternoon, Drew finished the structural repair on the 2nd floor. The new 8x8 timber column stood where the undersized post had been. The bearing plate was properly sized. The sister joists were bolted and shimmed. The deflection in the beam above was gone. Kate stood at the far end of the corridor and watched him set the last piece into place. She did not say anything. She walked over and handed him a cup of coffee, the same way she had the first time, black, no sugar, no questions. Drew took it. Their fingers touched around the cup, and neither of them moved their hand away for a moment longer than was necessary. Saturday morning, early November. The kitchen table was covered in balsa wood, white glue, and a set of hand-drawn plans that Sam had sketched on graph paper. He was building a model of the Whitfield building, not the restored version, the current one, with the scaffolding on the east side and the plywood over the 3rd-floor windows. Drew sat across from him, cutting small pieces of balsa with an X-Acto knife and handing them over when Sam pointed. They worked in the kind of silence that did not need filling. "Dad," Sam said, fitting a tiny column into place on the 2nd floor of the model. "Is the real building going to be okay?" Drew looked at his son. "Yeah," he said. "It is going to be fine." Sam nodded. He did not ask anything else. He glued the column and moved on to the window frames. That afternoon, Kate arrived at the Whitfield for the final walkthrough before signing the investment documents. Drew was already there. He was not in work clothes. He wore a clean button-down, the same one from the restaurant that first night, collar buttoned correctly this time. He had come on his own. They walked the building together. The 2nd floor, where Drew had replaced the column and Kate had first heard him cite building code from memory. The 3rd floor, where the envelope had been hidden behind the paneling for 12 years. The 1st-floor corridor, Where the staircase newel post Drew had turned on a lathe now matched the 1923 original so closely that you could not tell where the old ended and the new began. At the landing between the second and third floors, Kate stopped and put her hand on the railing. Drew had rebuilt it. Mortise and tenon, no nails, sanded until the oak was smooth enough to run a palm across without catching. She stood there for a long moment before either of them moved on. Kate signed the investment agreement on a folding table in the first floor lobby. $38 million committed. The trust director countersigned. Drew stood near the staircase and watched. Kate set the pen down and looked at him across the lobby. Neither of them spoke. The weight of the number on the page was less than the weight of what had led them here. That same day, the Davidson County District Attorney's Office formally charged Todd Harmon with 2 counts of criminally negligent homicide and 1 count of evidence tampering. He was booked and released on bond before sundown. Before Kate left the building, the trust director pulled Drew aside. "The board met last night," the director said. "We want you to lead the structural restoration, not as a carpenter, as the project engineer." Drew looked across the lobby at Kate. She was standing by the window, her back to him, reading something on her phone. She had not arranged this. But when she turned and caught his eye, she was not surprised. 3 months later, the Whitfield building was wrapped in scaffolding from the foundation to the roofline, and the restoration was underway. Drew Shelton's name was on the engineering drawings now, the real ones, stamped and filed with the city, every column and beam and bearing plate specified to code. Pete Donnelly's crew had won the general contracting bid. Drew had made sure of it. Pete had not said thank you. He had shown up on the first day of work with a new hard hat that had Drew's initials on it, and left it on the sawhorse without a word. Todd Harmon's trial was scheduled for March. His contractor license remained suspended. 2 of his former city council allies had quietly resigned from boards associated with Harmon development projects. The Delaware LLC that had purchased the adjacent property was under separate investigation by the state attorney general's office. In the Whitfield lobby, a brass plate had been installed at eye level near the front entrance. 2 names. The 2 workers who had died in the 2014 collapse. Below the names, the year. Nothing else. The families had been consulted on the wording. They had chosen not to add anything beyond the names and the date. It was enough. Drew and Kate had been seeing each other since the signing. Quietly. No announcement, no public acknowledgement. She had extended her stay in Nashville. The restoration required her presence. She told her Charlotte office, which was true and also not the entire reason. Drew had not asked her to stay. She had not asked him to ask. On a Sunday in January, Kate came to the Whitfield for a walkthrough. Drew was there with Sam. It was the first time the boy had been inside the building since the restoration began. Sam was carrying his model, the balsa wood Whitfield he had built on the kitchen table. He held it in both hands, carefully, the way you held something you had made yourself and were proud of. Kate knelt beside him and looked at the model for a long time. She asked him about the columns on the second floor, how he had figured out the right thickness for the balsa pieces. Sam explained, using the same quiet precision his father used, and Kate listened the way she listened in boardrooms, completely, without interruption, as though the answer mattered. Drew stood a few feet away and watched them. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Sam looked up at his father once, briefly, and then went back to explaining the bridge supports to Kate. It was the look of a boy who had decided something without being asked. That evening, Drew and Kate walked into the same upscale restaurant where it had all started. Same table. The hostess recognized Drew and did not bother to hide her surprise. He was dressed properly this time. Clean shirt, collar straight, no sawdust. Kate wore a dark dress, simpler than the blue sequined one. No earrings. She did not need them. They sat down. 2 glasses were poured. Both chairs were occupied. Halfway through dinner, Kate set her fork down and looked at him across the table. "You never told me," she said. "What happened with that blind date?" Drew took a sip of his wine. "She never showed up." Kate held his gaze. "Good." Drew almost smiled. Kate did smile, just barely, just enough. Outside, Nashville was doing what Nashville always did on a winter evening. The lights along Broadway visible in the distance. The sound of a steel guitar leaking out of a bar 2 blocks away. The particular hum of a city that never quite stopped moving. But inside the restaurant, at a corner table by the window, neither of them noticed any of it. The table for 2 was full, both seats taken. The empty chair from that first night, The one that had held nothing but 40 minutes of silence and a man who had stopped expecting anything, was no longer empty. Someone had walked across a dining room and chosen to sit down. The table had been set for two all along. It just needed someone willing to sit down.